The apartment on the 10th floor of the new building had initially felt like a triumph. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sprawling cityscape, a sparkling tapestry of lights by night. 3 months ago, Sarah, 26, and Mark, 26, had moved in together, their shared excitement palpable as they unpacked boxes, debated paint colors, and navigated the minor chaos of merging two lives. It had been a step forward, a solidifying of their year-and-a-half relationship, built on a foundation that, at the time, felt sturdy and reliable. Mark wasn't the kind of partner you read about in romance novels, all grand gestures and poetic declarations. His love language, Sarah had come to understand, was practical support. And in that realm, he was exceptional. He was the first to volunteer when something needed fixing around the apartment, the one who remembered to pay the bills on time, the steady presence she could always count on for logistical help. When her car broke down, he was there immediately, not just offering a ride but handling the tow truck and the mechanic with calm efficiency. He listened patiently when she vented about a tough day at work, even if his responses were brief and solution-oriented rather than emotionally validating. He'd pick up her favorite obscure snack from the grocery store without being asked, or surprise her with tickets to an event she'd mentioned in passing weeks ago. He encouraged her friendships, never batting an eye when she planned a girls' night out or spent a weekend visiting her family. He was, in so many tangible ways, a genuinely good partner. Kind in action, supportive in deeds, reliable to a fault. "He's just solid," she'd told her best friend, Chloe, over coffee a few months into dating, already knowing she was falling for him. "Like a really well-built house. You know it's not going to collapse." And for a long time, that felt like enough. More than enough, even. Sarah, with her tendency towards overthinking and anxiety, often felt grounded by his straightforwardness, his lack of unnecessary drama. His quiet strength felt like a balm to her own sometimes chaotic internal world. The fault line, however, was in the emotional terrain. Sarah craved connection, not just in shared activities or logistical support, but in the messy, vulnerable space of feelings. She needed reassurance, affirmation, the comfort of knowing her emotions were seen and met, not just acknowledged and worked around. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to operate on a different frequency. "I love you" was a phrase that rarely crossed his lips. Compliments were even rarer. When she did hear them, maybe once every few weeks, they felt earned, heavy with unspoken meaning, almost like a significant event. Initially, she tried to understand it, rationalizing that perhaps he felt actions spoke louder than words. But as time went on, the silence began to feel less like stoicism and more like withholding. She remembered a specific evening a few months before they moved in. They were cuddling on her old, worn-out sofa, watching a movie. The mood was relaxed, comfortable. She turned her head and looked at him, seeing the soft curve of his jaw, the way his hair fell slightly over his forehead. A wave of affection washed over her, warm and undeniable. "I love you," she whispered, leaning in to kiss his shoulder. He blinked slowly, eyes still fixed on the screen. "Yeah," he mumbled, and gave her shoulder a quick, patting squeeze. Then he went back to the movie. "Just yeah," she'd asked, trying to keep her tone light, but a knot of disappointment already tightening in her stomach. He sighed, a small, almost imperceptible sound, but enough to make her tense. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, not looking at her. "I don't know." "I love you too," she suggested gently. He finally turned his head, his expression neutral. "You know I do," he said, as if stating a fact of physics. "Why do I have to keep saying it? Doesn't it lose its meaning if you just say it all the time?" Her heart sank. "No," she said softly, "I think it gains meaning. It reinforces it. It's connecting." He just shrugged slightly and turned back to the movie. The moment was over, the warmth dissipated, replaced by a chill that lingered long after the credits rolled. This pattern repeated itself with compliments. If she asked him what he thought of her new haircut, he'd say, "Looks good." If she bought a new dress she was excited about, "Nice." Never, "Wow, you look amazing," or "That color really brings out your eyes." She felt childish for even wanting those things, for feeling a pang of hurt at their absence, but the feeling persisted. Later, when she tried to express this need more directly, he'd responded with frustrating logic. If I say I love you or compliment you whenever you ask or whenever you seem to need it, won't you just start needing it more? It feels like, if I give you what you need now, you'll just keep raising the bar. So maybe it's better to just keep it as it is. This reasoning floored her. It felt calculating, devoid of the spontaneous generosity she associated with emotional connection. It made her feel like a problem to be managed, a demand she shouldn't be making. The emotional disconnect became more pronounced after they moved in together. Sharing a space meant there was no escape from it. The practical aspects of living together were smooth, they divided chores easily, respected each other's need for space, coexisted without major friction. But the emotional intimacy she craved, the feeling of being truly seen and soothed, felt further away than ever. When she was upset, truly distressed, his reaction was almost invariably to shut down. She remembered a time she'd received some upsetting news from her family. Tears had welled up and started to fall as she recounted the story to him in the living room. She wasn't sobbing uncontrollably, just quiet, steady tears rolling down her cheeks. She looked at him, needing comfort, needing him to just be with her in her sadness. He sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed somewhere past her shoulder. He didn't reach out, didn't offer a tissue, didn't say, "I'm so sorry, babe." He just listened, his face a mask of, what? Discomfort? Impatience? It was hard to tell. When she finished, he simply nodded. "That's tough," he said flatly. "What are you going to do about it?" The question, so practical, so devoid of empathy, stung. "I don't know, Mark," she choked out, wiping her eyes. "Right now, I just feel sad. I kind of just need a hug." She held out her hand, a silent plea. He looked at her hand, then back at her face, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. He didn't move. He didn't speak. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, filled only by the sound of her own shaky breathing. Eventually, he uncrossed his arms, stood up, and said, "Well, let me know if you figure out a plan," before walking towards the kitchen. She sat there, alone with her sadness, feeling not just hurt by the news from her family, but profoundly lonely within her own home, beside the man she loved. It was moments like these that the term emotionally unavailable whispered its way into her thoughts. Then there was the face. Mark had a very neutral resting expression. To Sarah, whose anxiety often skewed her interpretations towards the negative, this neutral face frequently looked like disapproval, annoyance, or outright anger. His brow would furrow slightly when he was thinking, his lips would settle into a thin line. It was just his face, she knew, but it felt like a constant, silent accusation. This facial trigger led to the cycle that was slowly eroding their connection. Sarah would see the face, feel her anxiety spike, "Is he mad at me? Did I do something wrong?" and compulsively ask, "Are you okay? You look mad, or is something bothering you?" At first, Mark would patiently say, "I'm fine, Sarah. Just thinking." But as the questions became more frequent, his patience wore thin. His responses grew shorter, sharper. "I told you, I'm fine. Why do you always think I'm mad?" "Because your face looks like you are," she'd protest, knowing how irrational it sounded even as she said it. "This is just my face," he'd exclaim, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "You're accusing me of being mad when I'm not. It's exhausting." And it was. For both of them. These conversations, or rather, these painful exchanges, happened several times a week. They were having the same tiring argument over and over again, each iteration adding another layer of frustration and resentment. From Sarah's perspective, she was seeking reassurance, a simple confirmation that he wasn't upset with her, a request born from a genuine place of anxiety and a need for connection. From Mark's perspective, he was being falsely accused, his natural expression being pathologized, his truthful answers being dismissed. The gap widened. Sarah started to dread seeing that face, dreaded the impulse to ask, dreaded his frustrated reaction. She began to feel like a burden, like her mere presence, her mere need for reassurance, was an annoyance to him. There were moments, fleeting but sharp, when his frustrated tone, the way he'd sigh and turn away, made her feel like he didn't just find her annoying, but that he actually hated her. The thought was terrifying, and she'd immediately try to push it away, telling herself it was just her anxiety talking, her overactive imagination twisting his neutral expressions into something sinister. But the feeling, once felt, was hard to fully dispel. The tension culminated one rainy Saturday evening. It started with something trivial, a misplaced set of keys, a misunderstanding about dinner plans. But the underlying frustration from weeks of unmet needs and perceived accusations quickly surfaced, adding fuel to the small fire. They were standing in the living room, the city lights outside reflecting in the rain-streaked windows. The argument escalated quickly, voices rising. Sarah, feeling overwhelmed and misunderstood, felt tears prickling her eyes, that familiar, dreaded precursor to emotional vulnerability. Mark saw it. His face, already tight with frustration from the argument, seemed to harden further. He took a step back. "See," he said, his voice sharp. "Here we go again. You get upset, and then I have to fix it, or comfort you, or deal with it. It's always something. I'm not asking you to fix it." Sarah cried, tears now streaming down her face. I'm upset. Can't you just be kind? Can't you just not look at me like that when I'm hurting?" She gestured vaguely towards his face, instantly regretting the action, knowing how he'd react. He flinched as if she'd struck him. "My face?" he exploded, his voice loud in the quiet apartment. "It always comes back to my face, doesn't it? And my not saying I love you enough, and my not hugging you the right way. You're never happy with how I show things. You always make it seem like I don't care. But sometimes it feels like you don't," she sobbed, the words torn from her heart before she could stop them. "When you just sit there, when you shut down, it feels like you don't care at all." His face contorted, a mix of anger and something else she couldn't decipher. Hurt, perhaps? Frustration? "Fine," he said, his voice dangerously low and steady. "You think I don't care? Maybe I should show you what not caring actually looks like. Maybe then you'll appreciate what I do." He turned abruptly and walked towards the bedroom. Sarah stood frozen, watching, her breath catching in her throat. Was he leaving? But he didn't grab a suitcase. He went to the closet, pulled out a blanket and a pillow, and turned back. He didn't look at her. He walked past the living room sofa, dropping the blanket and pillow there. Then he walked into the kitchen. Sarah heard the fridge door open, then close. A moment later, he emerged with a bottle of water. Without a word, without another glance at her, he settled onto the sofa, lay down, pulled the blanket over himself, and turned his back to her. The message was stark, brutal. He was choosing the couch over the bed they shared, choosing physical separation as a demonstration, a punishment. He was explicitly linking her need for reassurance and her perception of his lack of care to this act of withdrawal. He was saying, "This is on you." Sarah didn't follow him. She couldn't. She stood in the middle of the living room, the silence deafening after the storm of their argument. The rain outside seemed to amplify her own quiet, ragged breathing. She felt abandoned, not just physically in that moment, but emotionally abandoned by the person who was supposed to be her partner, her refuge. Lying on the sofa, just feet away, was the man she loved, actively choosing to distance himself to make a point that felt cruel and utterly dismissive of her pain. She eventually stumbled into the bedroom, the large bed feeling vast and empty. She crawled under the covers, pulling them tight around her, but the coldness was internal. Tears flowed freely now, hot and heavy. She replayed his words, his actions. "Show you what not caring actually looks like." Did he mean it? Did he truly believe that her longing for emotional connection was so unreasonable that it warranted this kind of response? The thought that he could be so unfeeling, so punitive, sent shivers down her spine. She felt a terrifying echo of that earlier, unwanted thought. Does he hate me? The night was long and sleepless. Every rustle of the blanket on the sofa, every shift in his weight, was a reminder of the chasm between them. The next morning, the air in the apartment was thick with unspoken tension. Mark was already up when Sarah finally emerged from the bedroom, eyes heavy, throat sore from crying. He was making coffee, his back to her. The silence was deliberate, heavy with the weight of the previous night. Neither of them mentioned the sofa. It sat there, innocent in the morning light, but to Sarah, it felt like a monument to their failure to connect. Later that day, the conversation finally happened, initiated haltingly by Sarah. "Mark," she began, her voice soft, hesitant. "About last night." He turned from the sink, his expression still guarded, that familiar neutral face that looked so much like annoyance to her. "Yeah," he said, his tone flat. "Sleeping on the couch, it really hurt, Mark. It felt like you were punishing me." He sighed, a short, sharp sound that instantly put her on edge. "I wasn't trying to punish you, Sarah. I was trying to make you understand. You're constantly questioning me, constantly acting like I'm mad or that I don't care. I was trying to show you that what you think is not caring isn't actually it. But pushing me away is exactly what feels like not caring," she protested, a flicker of that night's pain resurfacing. "When I'm upset and you shut down, when I ask for comfort and you ignore me, when you sleep on the couch instead of talking to me, that's exactly it, Mark." He ran a hand over his face, looking tired and frustrated. "Okay, look," he said. "I think we need to be honest here. The core of this seems to be your anxiety, Sarah." Her stomach dropped. She knew this was coming. "My anxiety?" "Yeah," he continued, his tone softening slightly, becoming more measured, like he was trying to be reasonable. "You get anxious about my face, about what I'm thinking, about whether I love you enough. You need constant reassurance, and when I can't give it to you in the exact way you want, or as often as you want, you spiral. You ask the same questions over and over. It's tiring, Sarah. It feels like nothing I do is ever enough because the anxiety is always there, telling you otherwise." He paused, looking at her intently. Maybe you should talk to a doctor about it. Or try medication. I think if you could manage the anxiety, a lot of these problems would go away." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her acknowledged the truth in his words. Yes, her anxiety was a factor. It amplified her fears, made her interpret things negatively, fueled her need for reassurance. She had been considering therapy anyway, trying to understand and manage these tendencies. She was open to working on herself. "I am willing to go to therapy, Mark," she said, her voice quiet. "I've told you that. I know I have things to work on." "Good," he said, nodding, a hint of relief on his face. He seemed to genuinely believe this was the solution. But another part of her, the part that had felt that profound loneliness on the sofa, the part that ached for a connection he seemed incapable of providing, whispered a different truth. What if it wasn't just the anxiety? What if it wasn't a flaw in her that needed to be fixed, but a fundamental difference in them? She looked at him, at his kind, practical face, at the eyes that saw her distress but couldn't seem to translate it into the emotional language she understood. She saw the man who paid the bills, fixed the car, remembered her favorite snack, a man who genuinely cared for her in his way. But she also saw the man who went silent when she cried, who rationed his I love yous, who used physical distance as a tool. "But Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what if it's not just my anxiety? What if we're just emotionally incompatible?" The phrase hung in the air between them, heavy and charged. It was the question that had been simmering beneath the surface for months, now finally brought into the light. It wasn't about blame, it was about fundamental differences in needs and expression. She needed emotional validation, consistent reassurance, comfort and vulnerability. He provided practical support, reliable presence, problem solving. Was it possible that neither of them was inherently wrong, but simply wired differently, in ways that made a deep, mutually fulfilling emotional connection impossible? Mark's face closed off slightly. "I don't think that's it, Sarah," he said, his tone dismissive. "I think the anxiety is the main problem. If you felt more secure in yourself, you wouldn't need me to constantly prove things to you." His response, though perhaps genuinely what he believed, felt like another dismissal of her feelings, another redirection of the problem back onto her. It reinforced the very insecurity she was trying to address. It felt like he was saying, "Fix yourself, and then we'll be okay." But she suspected the gap was deeper than that. In the days and weeks that followed, the apartment felt less like a home and more like a holding cell for their unresolved issues. The silence lingered, broken by polite, superficial conversations. The sofa stood in the living room, a silent witness to the night of the argument, a constant, visual reminder of the distance between them. Sarah found herself increasingly irritable, not just about the big, glaring issues, but about tiny, insignificant things. The way he left his socks on the floor next to the hamper. The crumbs he left on the counter after making toast. The fact that he never replaced the toilet paper roll when it was empty, even if the new roll was right there on the tank. These were things she would have previously overlooked, minor annoyances in the grand scheme of a loving relationship. But now, fueled by the simmering resentment over the emotional gap, these small details grated on her nerves, proving to her, unfairly, she knew, but couldn't help feeling, that he was thoughtless, that he didn't consider her, that he didn't care about her needs, even the tiny, practical ones. She snapped at him more often, her tone sharp and defensive even when discussing mundane topics. This, in turn, made Mark withdraw further, confirming his belief that she was overly emotional, anxious, and difficult to handle. The cycle was self-perpetuating, dragging them both down. She knew the resentment was building, a toxic sludge collecting in her heart. It was dangerous. It was slowly poisoning the love she still felt for him. She saw the good in him, the steady reliability, the quiet kindness that manifested in actions. She didn't want to lose that. But the lack of emotional connection was a constant, gnawing ache. She felt like she was starving in a room full of food that she couldn't eat. He offered practical support, but she craved emotional nourishment, and he simply wasn't providing it. Was she asking for too much? Was her need for verbal affirmation, physical comfort during distress, and reassurance about his feelings simply too high, an impossible standard set by her own anxiety? Or was her need perfectly valid, a basic requirement for intimacy, and he was simply incapable or unwilling to meet it? The question of incompatibility loomed larger every day. It felt less like a solvable problem and more like a fundamental mismatch, like two puzzle pieces that look similar but have edges that will never quite fit together snugly. They could exist side by side, their shapes distinct, but they could never truly lock into place and form a unified picture. Sarah sat on the edge of their bed, the bed that felt cold and empty after that night, even when they were both in it. She looked around the apartment, the space they had created together, a space that now felt permeated by silence and unspoken conflict. She loved Mark, she truly did. But love, she was realizing with painful clarity, wasn't always enough. It wasn't enough to bridge the gap between different emotional languages, to fill the void left by unspoken words and withheld comfort. She was at a crossroads. One path involved trying desperately to change herself, to manage her anxiety to the point where she no longer needed the emotional reassurance he couldn't provide, hoping that would fix everything. The other path involved accepting that this fundamental difference might be insurmountable, and that staying would mean a lifetime of feeling emotionally undernourished, slowly eaten away by resentment. And the third path? The terrifying, uncertain path of walking away, of leaving the safety and reliability he offered in search of a connection that might satisfy her deeper needs, a path with no guarantees. She didn't know which way to go. The feeling of being trapped, of being caught between her love for him and her need for emotional fulfillment, was overwhelming. The only certainty was the growing ache in her heart, the silent question echoing in the quiet apartment: were they simply too different? Was their love strong enough to overcome this canyon between their emotional worlds, Or were they destined to stand on opposite sides, forever looking across the distance, unable to truly reach each other? The story was far from over, but the hopeful beginning felt like a distant memory. Now, it was a story of uncertain middle ground, a narrative defined by unspoken needs, frustrated misunderstandings, and the heavy, looming question of whether two good people, loving in different ways, could ever truly find their way home to each other in the emotional landscape of a shared life.